battleground. That's me.
So we have a show on Channel 20 called Creepy Copy Movie Time. It's on Saturday nights at 11. We're in reruns right now. But we're having a thing called The Gathering of the Creeps next weekend.
The event will be held at the Castro Valley Moose Lodge. Yes, the Moose Lodge.
That's the mark of quality.
We're going to turn it up. Going to get turned.
So I'm going to talk about Jack Pierce, because I made a film last year called Jack Pierce, Maker of Monsters. Jack Pierce was a Greek immigrant who moved from Greece in the 1900s to Chicago. He became a shortstop baseball player in Chicago. Before moving, his family decided to move to San Francisco where there was more opportunities, so they moved to San Francisco. And I've read newspaper reports that he was actually in the 1906 earthquake, and that's what drove the family to Los Angeles. So he moved to Los Angeles from the earthquake, and this is 1913. The earliest pictures I found of Jack Pierce are from 1913, so it's the very, very beginning of the film industry in Los Angeles. Why I made a documentary on Jack Pierce is how you start. So I was raised in the Bay Area, watched Bob Wilkins on Channel 2. So classic horror. He's the one who introduced me to watching the original, classic Universal horror films. And as a kid with two brothers I didn't know, I just saw these black and white movies that were scary. They were awesome, but I didn't know much else than that. I was lucky enough to know Bob Wilkins, and he was really, really good. Even on air, if you watched him, he was really good at encouraging people. And he was like that through his entire life. We lost him 5 years ago for Alzheimer's. But up to the end, he was always really supportive. He's really supportive of arts and pushing people to do more than they think they can. And so I always gave that, I look at that as an inspiration. And also, there was a guy that I first saw on Bob Wilkins named Ernie Faisalius. And Ernie Faisalius made a movie called Hardware Wars. And he was encouraged by Wilkins as well. And I was lucky enough for my film, the entire thing is narrated by Ernie Faisalius. I was also really lucky that my grammar school had horror books. In our library, I was a little kid and they had these horror books. So I'm watching Creature Features with my brothers. And they had these picture books, and in those picture books were all the pictures of Frankenstein, Dracula, the Mummy, all that stuff. And again, I'm just like a kid, that's cool stuff. But there was never a real connection made about those characters until I discovered Famous Monsters of Filmland. And my dad would take me to a smoke shop, and he would let me pick anything I wanted to, and I'd just walk over next to Playboys and say, I want that Famous Monsters. And I got Famous Monsters, and through Famous Monsters of Filmland, I discovered one guy did all these makeups for Universal Studios, and that was Jack Pierce. And all of a sudden, my brain, I'm like, wow, one guy did all this really cool stuff. He must have been like in a mad scientist lab or whatever. So when I eventually started doing documentaries, I started doing Bay Area documentaries. So I did one on Playland, Sutros, the Cliff House. They were getting popular and successful from it. So I'm always looking to make sure that I don't get too popular and successful, because that's what artists do generally. And I always pick stuff that's not that. You always find stuff you want to do that you don't. That is interesting to yourself, so you make something good. But at the same time, it's like, well, you don't want to make it. I'm going to do one on Batman, yeah. So I looked for Jack Pierce material, and there was no material on Jack Pierce. There was like nothing. And I thought for sure there'd be a movie or something about Jack Pierce, and I found absolutely nothing. So I'm like, hey, wait, I can make a documentary on Jack Pierce now. And so I started collecting material on Jack Pierce. And to collect material today and nowadays, it's far easier because of eBay and just Google searches and stuff. So I was able to track down a lot of stuff really fast. But then I also discovered other sources. And one of the things I found was a book on Jack Pierce. It's like a pamphlet, really, by Scott Esman. And it was his history. And it's a really tiny, brief history on Jack Pierce. And so that was the first starting block of like, okay, I can get a story out of this because of this book. And I contacted Scott Esman, and he's been incredibly generous with me and has shared so much with me, and I couldn't have made this film without him, period. He's been great for it. So digging for material, besides eBay and stuff like that, I found Eddie Bryant's Saturday Matinee, which is a little tiny video shop in Los Angeles, but they have a massive collection of stills. and they're not cataloged in it, so you have to go down and just like search through them. So you get these tax sheets with a magnifying glass, and for months I was going through, and sure enough discovered a whole bunch of stuff on Jack Pierce that a lot of it wasn't seen. While you're starting to look for this stuff, you start to get the crawlers out, especially when you start paying money for stuff, people start coming out of the woodwork. And I had a private email to me from an unknown source saying, I have Jack Pierce's scrapbook. Would you like access to that? And I knew that Jack Pierce's scrapbook existed because I'd found on several different auction sites where it had been sold off several times. So I knew it existed, but of course, I want access to that book. And the guy never responded to me. I would email, he would never respond. So Scott asked me again. I go, this guy says he has a scrapbook, and Scott's all, I have photographs of the entire scrapbook. Do you want it? I'm all, yes, give me the scrapbook. So we made a deal. And that answered so many questions. There was so much in his scrapbook that I was just looking at him as like a horror makeup guy that did these things. But he worked for Universal for so long and he was their lead makeup guy. So he was the man for Universal. So just getting dates and times and names and stuff out of that book, especially early photographs, which are all in the documentary, was amazing to get that. And the last piece to do it was I got an audio interview from a guy named Bob Burns. It's from a 1962 TV show where Pierce was interviewed, and it's the only audio of him talking about his history. It was only recorded on audio, it wasn't recorded on video because they didn't have video recorders, so Bob Burns sent a friend over to home to tape it while Bob Burns sat in the audience. So I got that. In that interview, Jack Pierce tells pretty much what he did historically, monster-wise. So I was able to break that into pieces to make the documentary, which made it really easy for me because then it's a linear timeline. So I had all the ducks in a row. So it was time to start working on the film. And I started, again, with this scrapbook and all the other stuff I found, I started discovering some really amazing things. One, he was in Hollywood super early, like I said. This is the beginning of Hollywood in Los Angeles. And two, back in those days, to keep their employees active and healthy, they all had sports teams. And he was coming from baseball. He couldn't play baseball in California because he just wasn't big enough. Everybody was beating him, he was too small. But basketball was new, and he could manage the team. So what he did early on is he started managing teams. And this is the Larry Seaman team. Larry Seaman was a silent actor, obviously. But he was very popular at the time, so it was a kind of a big break that Pierce would get to work with somebody like him at the time. He also acted. He started acting. He started doing stunts. He started doing production work too. So I have pictures of him behind the camera. So he was not just an actor and a makeup guy, but he knew the ins and outs of making films. So in the documentary, you'll see pictures of him early on where they're in the middle of nowhere, and there's like 4 guys, and that's the whole cast and crew. So at the time, everybody was doing all the work to make these films. So he knew the ins and outs of how to make film. But what really set him apart was he did his own makeup. So this is the time of Lon Chaney. The reason Lon Chaney was as huge as he was is because he could do his own makeup. Jack Pierce could do his own makeup too. He's short and not menacing on camera, so often he was getting hired to do makeup on other actors. And that was an oddity too, back then. There was very few people that did this kind of work. So he was in demand. In 1927, he did a movie called The Monkey Talks. The makeup in this movie is amazing. It makes Planet of the Apes look crappy. And this is 27. And I tracked down a 35mm, that's the last one that Kodak had, got it transferred, and so it's in the documentary, there's a scene from the movie. And now since I got it transferred, it's on YouTube, you can go watch The Monkey Talks. It's a great movie from beginning to end, but the makeup is astounding. It was the talk of the town at the time. And some of the reviews even said that the well-trained chimpanzee is amazing to watch, so some of the critics were even convinced that it was a real monkey. Lon Chaney leaves Universal. And Pierce just made The Monkey Talks. So The Man Who Laughs was going to be a Lon Chaney film. They knew they needed somebody who was really good, and at the time Pierce was the name. So they said, let's get Pierce. So this is the makeup that Pierce developed for The Man Who Laughs, and that's the Joker. Bob Kane borrowed a lot of different faces of his villains from movies, but this is Jack Pierce's makeup. He designed it, he made it, and that's what the Joker is today. I've just read an article in Variety where they gave credit to the director of The Man Who Laughs to creating the Joker. And I wrote him, I go, no, it was the makeup man. The director just said, yeah, that looks great, go. So this is Jack Pierce's first big step on pop culture. I mean, this is a big underline in pop culture that he created.
And the character ended up being played by someone else.
Actually, the character is a Conrad Vett. So this is the actor from
Sorry, Ted Brownie's the director.
Yeah, Veidt was the actor, and Browning was the director. But he's played the subdanulist in Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And which is fun, Universal latched on to their actors, their leads. So like Lon Chaney was the one, and as you'll see, other characters will come along. Vett was going to be their guy, but sound came along, and he had a really thick German accent. So he couldn't be a sound actor. And this will cripple Lugosi because of this movie. Dracula was originally going to be a Chaney film as well, but Chaney had already left Universal, and he ended up doing another film called London After Midnight, which is a vampire film, because Dracula was on stage. It was amazing. It was massive. It was a really big hit. Dracula on stage was. And Bela Lugosi was playing Dracula in the movie. So since they lost Lon Chaney, they approached Bela Lugosi to play Dracula in Universal's version of it. And he agreed. He didn't want Pierce to do his makeup because he'd been doing his own stage makeup the entire time. And I think he was right to do it because that movie, it's one of my favorite movies. I think they got it right with Frankenstein, how gothic, how great Frankenstein is visually. But Dracula definitely set the tone for like, wow, there's something new going on here. These are amazing new horror features. So Pierce designed all the makeup for everybody on the cast, because at that time, after The Man Who Laughs was a hit, he became head of Universal's makeup. He was the guy. So he did all the makeup, but he also developed a green grease paint for Dracula that looked deathly in black and white. So he, again, knowing his shit inside out for film, he said, we can do this and that and make him look so he looks scarier on screen. So after the success of Dracula, they went to Frankenstein. And Frankenstein set up, again, I think it's my favorite movie because the tone, it's so gothic. They got everything, all the pistons are firing right for Universal in the horror element is going on good. But again, another iconic makeup. This is the second underscore that Pierce has in pop culture. He, in every interview that I've got written on a tape, on everything I've ever got from Karloff and Pierce, he is given full credit for making the makeup. Pierce is giving full credit for making Frankenstein, period. As soon as both of them passed away, it's a short time where it was mentions that the director had a hand in it. And soon enough, there's a book that comes out that says, yeah, the director did it. And then Gods and Monsters comes out and they're saying, the director made that. It's his makeup. So again, it's just a big black mark on his name, and it's not true. Everything says that he did the makeup, and I'm here to fight for the right that Pierce made Frankenstein's makeup. It also set up a lifelong friendship. Boris Karloff and Jack Pierce, every interview, everything I ever found on them, they have nothing but great things to say about each other. Bromance to the max, these guys were cool. Karloff liked to tend roses, and Pierce liked his petunias in his house, and they both had ranches. So they got along famously, and their friendship lasted their whole life. In fact, in the documentary, at the very end of it, is the last interview with Karloff that was done for a Creature Features event. And it's the same year that Pierce died, and he's talking about Pierce in the first person, so I think it was the interview right before Pierce had died. So he didn't know that it hadn't happened yet, but it's the last year where both of them are actually alive, in the last interview he ever did. So then we get to The Mummy. And The Mummy is the only makeup that he actually won an award in his lifetime for. So this is the only makeup that Pierce ever got recognized by his peers for making. And it was the Filmography Award, which later kind of turned in the Oscar, and Pierce does refer to it later as his Oscar. There's a story that says that the people at Universal taped his award underneath the sink and he never got it, but that's completely, I think, false. He talks about it finally later on that he still has it, and he'll bring it into the TV station if he wants to. So there's a lot of stories about Pierce being not a nice guy and stuff like that, like, oh, they had to get rid of him because he was hard to work with, but I'll get to that in a minute. The other thing you always hear is that Pierce, that Karloff and Lugosi disliked each other. Lugosi, with this hit, Dracula, was cast, like Universal did, to be the next star in the next horror film, which was Frankenstein. But his accent wasn't going to work for the Dr. Frankenstein, so they said, well, you can be the monster. And Lugosi did have a problem with that. But it's the same year they cast him in Murders of the Rue Morgue. Pierce did that makeup too, and Pierce did Frankenstein. So I don't think there's any huge, horrible fight between any of them, and I don't think there's any kind of damage control that they try and portray. Yeah.
Disagreements, but if they
Yeah.
on it, you're happy movies.
For sure. Yeah, and then, I mean, he also, I mean, I'm sure the drug problem got to Lugosi. White Zombie, overlooked classic horror film. And this is it was shot on Universal sets. It was Universal's equipment, and it was Jack Pierce doing the makeup. So in all senses, it was a Universal film, but it was an independent film, which brought up to me that Pierce freelanced. And that was important because there's pictures in his scrapbook that are from different production companies later on, and people fight saying he didn't work on that or that because he only worked for Universal. It's like, no, he freelanced. So who knows what other movies he did besides the probably thousands he's uncredited for Universal. This kicked in to high gear for Universal making horror films. So all of a sudden, Universal is making bank, making classic horror films, and Henry Hall. That werewolf makeup is Henry Hall, and originally his makeup was a full face werewolf makeup. And I showed in the documentary, and Hall points out in the script that people recognize him. So they put it down to that makeup so that they could see his face. And but that classic full face look will come back with Lon Chaney Jr. with Wolfman. So like I said, Pierce was head of makeup. So a lot of articles I found was him just talking about fashion makeup and how women can take care of their skin better. And all these tips, because back then the makeup was pretty new. He worked with Max Factor. And so he did all of their movies. So he was a master at glamour makeup as well. So not only did he do the horror stars, but he did these amazingly beautiful women. He could do it, in his sleep probably. But the other interesting thing I find, he continues to manage the Universal basketball team. So he goes, it's 1936, and the Universal basketball team wins national champions. That's the same year that they introduced basketball, the first time it's introduced to the Olympics. So they invite his team to go to the Olympics. And it's the very first time that basketball is played at the Olympics. They win gold. They win basketball. But Karl Lammel is a Jew, and he's bringing people out of Germany. It's Hitler's Germany. So he tells anybody who's in Universal, if you go to Hitler's Olympics, you will never work for Universal again. So before they go to Germany, Pierce steps down. But he managed that team. So Pierce technically managed the first gold-winning team in basketball in Olympic history. Which, just knowing that, when I stumbled upon that stuff, I'm like, wow, the 6 guys that did go to play basketball never worked at Universal again. Which is funny, though, because at this point in time, Karl Lammel and his son have been removed from Universal. It looks like a corporate takeover. I kind of go a little bit into it. I try not to dive too much into crazy rabbit holes in the documentary, but it was a bad takeover. The other thing that happens in 38, so the Lammels are gone from Universal, but a theater in Los Angeles shows Frankenstein and Dracula together as a double feature. And back then, there wasn't a whole lot of old showings of movies. It's a huge hit. It's a big success. They're making money hand over fist, so Universal's all like, this is where real art comes into play too. Across the nation, they start releasing Frankenstein and Dracula again. Before you know it, Jack Pierce is back in the monster business. He's doing monsters again. And a bunch of his classics are coming back out of the woodwork, and we discover a new classic. Again, another underscore on pop culture with the Wolfman and Lon Chaney Jr. I put an interview with Lon Chaney Jr. in the documentary where he talks about the makeup process. And I came away with thinking that I think the guy was a real jerk. He's just got a bad attitude. He's a prima donna, and he was an alcoholic too. He's just really not a nice guy. And the only 2 times that I found that he got talked really badly about, Pierce did, was by Lon Chaney Jr. and Elsa Lancaster. Elsa Lancaster said he was a prima donna. He was all trouble and stuff like that. It can't be, because the guy stayed at Universal forever. He went through several management changes. He was the best friends with most of his actors. I think the deal with Pierce was He was a professional, and if you came in with attitude, it was like, sit the fuck down and I'll do your makeup. Just shut up, I don't want to talk to you. So I think they got that it was like, oh, you're not treating me really well. And it's like, yeah, because I've been there, I've done that. I've done all the things that you are now walking into. I pioneered this stuff. So I don't think he was a bad guy. He couldn't have been with all the friendships he had. It turned into, I think it was just people talking about in books to sell books and being prima donnas. Did more famous makeups. They redid the Phantom of the Opera with. They had to tone down his makeup. His original makeup, there was no photographs taken that I could find, but it was supposed to be really gory. But it's World War II. People coming home scarred, so they said reduce the amount of gore in it. He also did all this stuff in dressing room number 5. That's his whole career was in dressing room number 5, which was Chaney's room. So all the makeups for Universal for all that time came out of that one room. So they finally get to the point with Universal that they're just more is better. So one of the things I did in the documentary is made sure that linearly you see the films as they come out. Because as a kid, when I saw all the different horror films, I was always confused of like, why is the Wolfman and Frankenstein fighting? It's like, in my brain, I was like confused, and so to actually see it linearly how they did it. It also shows the first franchise. Frankenstein basically is one of the first franchise films where they made multiple films. But we see all the time now, we take it for granted. It's like, you know, Iron Man 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So Frankenstein technically was one of the first films where they had a franchise. And when that movie played, the double bill played, of Dracula and Frankenstein, I actually put in the documentary, there's the guy at the theater who showed it, said these are well-recognized characters. So people knew from the books and magazines and all that stuff that were around who Frankenstein and Dracula were, and there was already a franchise for it. It was already built in, so they knew they could just exploit it and exploit it and exploit it, as long as they did an okay film. By this time, I don't think they did such good films. And at that time, that's when Pierce is let go, and Bud Westmore is brought in as head of makeup at Universal. Pierce was, again, I don't think he was hard to work with. It was new management. And Bud Westmore, his father, had had all of his kids get different makeup jobs. His dad was, Westmore's dad was a hairdresser. And I found an article where the kids are saying, yeah, it's a sissy job, because it's back in, say, people have sissy jobs. And they didn't want to do the makeup because that's sissy, but they said his dad basically beat him into doing it. So however they got into Universal, and Pierce was let go. He did work on more films. So Joan of Arc with Ingrid Bergman, which is an amazing film. And there's pictures that I have of him, and they're in the documentary too, that where Pierce is incredibly happy. He's sitting there with a scrapbook showing her, and she's just like overjoyed too. There's a picture of her dressed up as a witch, and it took me forever to figure out it was Ingrid Bergman, and it's like at a Halloween party on the set. So he's dressing them up as like characters too, so he's having a great time. I don't think it broke his heart that he was out of Universal. He started doing low-budget movies too. So low-budget movies, and he started doing a lot of work on TV, including showing up on This Is Your Life for Boris Karloff. And the This Is Your Life for Boris Karloff, you can see the guys still totally are like, it's so great to see you. It's awesome. You know, it's been so long. And they talk about the makeup and the good times they had and how hard they worked on that stuff. Again, going back to the point that he was not hard to work with, Arthur Lubin, who he worked with on some Abbott and Costello movies at Universal, came back to him when he was out of work and said, work on the Mr. Ed show with me. And he was the head makeup artist for Mr. Ed for years. That was his last professional job before he died. But again, it shows the guy was probably very personable, very nice, a good guy, and a hard worker. And that's pretty much the end of his life. Was he did he finally did the work on Mr. Ed, and when he passed away, I mean, he created some of the most iconic monsters in history. We still look at him and are amazed by the work he did. Managed a basketball team to Olympic gold. Did these really cool things, and 24 people showed up to his funeral. This is before social media. Probably he was buried before most of the people knew, and that's why I go back to that Karloff interview. He might have been dead then, and Karloff just hadn't known, didn't hear about it yet. So that's why I always trip off that interview. But it's like people's questions sometimes are like, well, how could so few people come and we did all these great things? Again, there's no social media, but again, like Ray Harryhausen just passed away recently, and I don't know how many people were at his funeral, but I bet you it would look like an ant farm compared to like Justin Bieber died. It'd be all of a sudden everybody, oh my God, you know. So Hollywood's always been that way. They like to, you know, the term use you up and spit you out could be said, but his marks are always going to be there, to the point of all of the Rick Baker, Dick Smith, Greg Nicotero, Tom Savini, all credit Jack Pierce with their inspiration, why they got into makeup and why they're doing what they did. I was lucky enough to just meet Rick Baker. We all met.
Yeah, it was awesome.
And he was like, oh, I gave him a copy of the movie, so I'm excited to see this. I heard it was going to be here, so. This I'm wrapping it up now. So we have the documentary. We have a table out in the back, the very furthest hallway down there, and we have all of our films, and we have Creepy Coffee movies on DVD. But the one thing that I heard, it's on they did a documentary on Jack Pierce on one of the DVDs for Universal Classics, and one of the guys interviewed said, and it rings so well, that Pierce did all these great things, and that every Halloween his kids come out, because every Halloween to this day, Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula, they all come out, the Mummy. And so those are his kids, because he had no heirs. There's no kids. I think I've tracked down a niece or something. I'm not quite sure. We're kind of playing email tag right now, but she has no idea who Jack Pierce is. But I think she's related, because Blanche was his wife, which is another weird story. I couldn't find a picture of his wife, Blanche, and they're buried right next to each other in Forest Lawn. If you drive into Forest Lawn, literally it's like 30 feet up, just stop and walk out. There's a pond with a Moses baby, little water pond, and just right at your feet are Jack Pierce and Blanche Pierce. But I couldn't find a picture of Blanche Pierce. And in a picture of Pierce getting his award with Karloff for The Mummy, there's a woman standing next to him with a little brooch. And it says it's his wife, but it's a really bad picture. I'm like, oh yeah, I got one picture of his wife, it's bad. But then at that whole Halloween party thing where he was dressing people up, there's a picture of Jack Pierce dressed up with a woman with the brooch, and it's a clear shot of her. I'm like, it's fucking Blanche, I got her. So you got Blanche, Blanche is in there, you got her. So that's the documentary on Jack Pierce. I hope that you guys enjoyed learning about Jack Pierce. And this
Hey, Don.
He's in. So does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, the documentary is terrific.
Thank you.
And I just had a question with all your research. At the end of his career with Universal, basically, did he get screwed by the Westmores? I mean, how essential were they in getting him out of Universal?
You know what? There's no record of saying that there was. In fact, there's no record of Pierce ever signing a contract with Universal. So he worked, from what we can tell, purely on shake hand, good hard work. There's a lot of speculation on what happened, what went down. A lot of people left at that time. I mean, their head of costumes, the woman who did almost all the costumes for them, was let go at the same time as Pierce. A couple other people were let go. So I think it was just a change in the guard. I think it was finally like, let's clear these sheets and get a new group of people in for whatever reason. Like I said earlier, there were stories of them taping his award underneath the sink because they didn't like him, and that's not true, because he talks about it. He didn't say they didn't, he just says, hey, I can bring my award the next time I have it. So it's like, okay, that rumor is completely blown out. So I don't think it was probably ugly. I think it was probably more or less like, oh, sorry, bye. Because he did work on bigger films after that at other studios. So it's just, I think it's just I don't think there was me personally, from what I saw, I don't think there was a big blow up or any kind of thought. Again, with social media now, that'd probably be huge, but. Any other questions? Nope. Does anybody have questions for? Yeah, that's the cover for it. And if you go all the way down to the other hallway, like this hallway you come down to get to there, there's another hallway down there that's all the guest artists are there, and we're right there, so. That's it? We're all good? You guys have creepy coffee questions?
Are you guys going to come to our party next weekend?
We're going to have a party. You're all invited.
Come on.
Gin and tonics.
Small ripple.
God, that sounds good.
Yes. Thank you, and we are all hungover, so.
We are hungover.
Thanks for coming.